Hi, it's John, and in this video we're going to take a look at the performance of the Tamron 150 to 500mm super telephoto zoom on Nikon's crop bodies. This video builds on my detailed review of the Tamron 150 to 500mm. Check out that video to get a full understanding of the features and performance of the lens. And as I mentioned in the detailed review video, the Tamron 150 to 500 is quickly becoming one of my favourite lenses, and I was very interested to see how it would perform on a crop body. Firstly, I don't think we can assess the performance of the lens without discussing handling on the smaller Nikon bodies. The 150 to 500 is pretty hefty at around 4 pounds, and it handles well on the Z8 body with its large grip. The Z8 has some heft that helps counterbalance the weight of the lens. When we look at the lens on a crop body, we have to consider the crop factor, which gives us a full frame equivalent field of view of 225 to 750mm. This definitely compounds the handling issues.
The grip on the Z30 and Z50 bodies helps with the handling, though I think the size of the lens feels a bit mismatched on those small bodies. This is much worse with the ZFC, and I think shooting the 150 to 500 on that body without a grip would be a pain. I have the small rig grip on my ZFC, which I think makes it much better to shoot any lens, let alone such a large super telephoto one. But it still has limitations, as it feels like the grip flexes when I hold the camera and lens by my side. And it's quite a bit of weight being supported by the 1/4-20 bolt that attaches the grip to the camera tripod thread. But overall it's a workable combination. So let's take a quick look at build quality. As I mentioned in my detailed lens review, the build quality of the lens is good, but I did notice some play in the lens mount that I haven't experienced in my other Z mount lenses. I attached the lens to a Z8, a Z6 and a ZFC, and they all had similar amounts of play. The issue has been raised in the comments section of that video, so it's not just my copy. The play in the lens mount doesn't seem to impact the operation of the lens as far as I can tell, and after being initially very aware of it, I generally don't notice it. Otherwise, the lens has a robust feel to it.
Moving on to image stabilization. As of early 2024, none of Nikon's Z-mount crop bodies have IBIS, so all the VR efforts are done by the lens. And since the lens doesn't have physical switches to control vibration reduction, VR is controlled in the camera body. And as usual, the ZFC offers off, normal or sports options. I did some basic testing of the VR, and the image stabilization seems to do an okay, but not spectacular job for stills. The effective angle of view with the crop body is equivalent to 750mm full frame, so any camera shake should be more visible than on a full frame body.
I fired off the burst without VR at 1/1000th of a second and then at 1/500th of a second to get some sort of a baseline. At 1/500th of a second I'm getting sharp images most of the time. At 1/1000th they're nearly all sharp. Turning on VR and dropping the shutter speed by 2 stops to 125th of a second, I'm getting roughly the same number of sharp shots as at 1/500th of a second without VR. Now let's look at 1/15th of a second, which is another 3 stops lower. Here I'm only getting the odd clean image, but VR is definitely helping. When shooting video, the VR isn't up to the job shooting handheld. I was shooting with the VR set to normal, and you can see the warping effect as the system tries to stabilize the image. In each of these shots I'm standing upright unsupported. In many real-world situations I'd find something to brace myself against, but typically you're going to need some support. EVR combined with mechanical VR can't do enough to overcome the jittery footage. Next up, let's cover sharpness of the lens. I won't shoot a test chart as I've covered that in my main review video. Instead, we'll take a look at some real-world images I've taken with the lens attached to the ZFC. With an effective view of 750mm at the long end of the zoom range, I was careful to shoot with a high shutter speed. Most of the images were shot between 1/2000th of a second and 1/3200th of a second. I think overall the lens does a nice job given we're on a crop sensor. The images hold up well at computer monitored viewing sizes and are nice punching in. You definitely can't expect to crop in as much as with a full frame camera, and that's clear with this set of images. But because we're already cropped in with a DX sensor, the sharpness across the frame is more consistent than with a full frame sensor. Check out the sharpness test in my detailed review video for more information on how the sharpness at the DX corners holds up, whereas the corners on the FX frame are just that little bit softer.
I'm not going to spend a lot of time on chromatic aberration as it's pretty well controlled by the lens, but the images with the Coast Guard helicopter are starting to show a little purple fringing around the edges of the trees.
Now let's take a look at the autofocus acquisition and tracking capabilities of the 150 to 500 on the ZFC.
And rather than talk through my settings, I've detailed them here. Feel free to pause the video to review them.
I'd say that the initial lock-on to the subject at long focal lengths was occasionally hit and miss, but once the camera and lens had the subject in focus, it did a nice job tracking it. A few photos in the sequences were slightly out of focus, but overall the camera did a really solid job tracking and focusing on the subjects. The ZFC is no Z8, but it performs at a level that is very usable for a camera that is a fifth the cost. Affordable mirrorless cameras have come a long way since I started shooting them 13 years ago.
So wrapping up this video, I had a fun time shooting the Tamron 150-500 on the Nikon ZFC. The combination is very capable of taking nicely detailed images, even in some poorly lit scenarios. Sharpness is good across the DX frame and can take some cropping. And autofocus acquisition and tracking work well on what are reasonably priced bodies. The only caveat is that the camera occasionally struggles to initially acquire focus on a new subject, but once it does lock on, the accuracy of the tracking and focus is impressive for the price. And consistent with my VR experiences with the lens on a Z8 body, image stabilization on a ZFC is okay. It's far from ineffective, but it's not class leading. Would I choose to take the Tamron out with a cropped body if I had a 46 megapixel body at my disposal? Probably not, as the handling on the larger bodies makes it more manageable to carry and handle the lens. And cropping the 46 megapixel image into the DX frame gives roughly the same resolution as the ZFC, so the only advantage here is the weight saving of the cropped body. But I think that's a false economy. Potentially I could see a choice between a Z6 and a cropped body going the way of the cropped body, if I needed more effective reach. With the Z6, the DX crop is around 10 megapixels, so you're getting twice the pixel count with the ZFC. If you know you're going to be punching into the DX frame consistently, the 20 megapixel ZFC will out-resolve the 10 megapixel DX frame of the Z6. Based on some testing I've done, there is indeed a difference, and you can see this when you punch into real-world examples. So summing up, if you own one of Nikon's cropped Z bodies, the 150-500 provides us nice super telephoto lens option at a reasonable price and relatively compact form factor. And if, down the road, you add a full-frame body to your kit, the Tamron will perform even better for you. So that wraps up this video. If you have any questions or your own observations about the lens on a cropped body, it would be great to hear your thoughts. And thanks for checking out the video. If it's been helpful, please like the video, subscribe and leave a comment below.